The scorching Arizona sun beat down on the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Tsitsi Mijares hurried toward her father's store, clutching a basket of freshly picked desert wildflowers. It was 1873, and the small frontier town was experiencing the usual midday lull when most sensible folk sought shelter from the relentless heat. But for Tsitsi, even the punishing sun couldn't dim her spirits as she hummed a traditional dine melody under her breath. At 22, Tsitsi had grown accustomed to the curious stares that followed her through town. Her father, Miguel Mijares, had married her mother, a Navajo woman named Najoni, creating a family that straddled two worlds. After her mother's passing 5 years earlier, Tsitsi had become even more determined to honor both sides of her heritage, wearing traditional Navajo jewelry alongside the practical cotton dresses expected of civilized women. As she approached her father's general store, the sound of raised voices made her pause. Through the dusty window, she could see her father engaged in a heated discussion with Sheriff Dawson. Tsitsi slipped in through the side door, setting her basket down on the counter. "Papa, is everything all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Miguel Mijares turned, his weathered face creasing into a forced smile. "Ah, Tsitsi. Nothing to worry about. The sheriff was just informing me about some trouble with cattle rustlers." Sheriff Dawson nodded curtly. "Miss Mijares, your father's right, nothing for a lady to concern herself with. Just letting folks know to keep an eye out for strangers passing through." His gaze lingered on her beaded necklace and silver Navajo bracelet before he tipped his hat and exited the store. He wasn't just talking about cattle rustlers, was he? Tsitsi asked once the sheriff was gone. Her father sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "No, hija. There's been trouble with the reservation. Some young men went missing, and there are rumors they've been captured by ranchers claiming they were stealing cattle." Tsitsi's jaw tightened. "And, of course, the sheriff isn't concerned about finding them." "Tsitsi," her father warned, glancing toward the door. "We must be careful with our words. We have made a life here, but we must remember our position is precarious." Before Tsitsi could respond, the bell above the door jingled. A tall man ducked his head to enter, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Dust coated his denim trousers and cotton shirt, and a leather gun belt hung at his hip, the unmistakable appearance of a cowboy fresh off the trail. "Afternoon," he said, his voice deep and touched with a slight drawl. "Name's Xavier Zane. Just rode in with a herd from Texas. Was hoping to pick up some supplies." Miguel quickly shifted into shopkeeper mode. "Of course, Mr. Zane. What can I help you with?" As her father assisted the newcomer, Tsitsi busied herself arranging her wildflowers in a jar, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the stranger. Unlike many of the cowboys who passed through Willow Creek, there was something gentler about his presence, despite his imposing height and the capable way he carried his sidearm. Xavier Zane felt her gaze and turned, offering a polite nod. "Madam." Their eyes met briefly, and Tsitsi noted they were a striking blue, not cold like the sheriff's, but warm and curious, like the summer sky. She nodded back before returning to her flowers, aware of a sudden warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. "You planning to stay in town long, Mr. Zane?" Miguel asked as he gathered the cowboy's purchases. "Call me Xavier, please. And yes, for a spell. I've taken on work at the Double R Ranch. Boss man's short-handed with the summer drives coming up." Tsitsi stiffened at the mention of the Double R. Ronald Redding's sprawling cattle operation had been encroaching on Navajo lands for years, and rumors suggested he was behind the disappearance of the young men from the reservation. "The Double R," her father repeated, his tone carefully neutral. "I see. Well, you'll find Willow Creek to be a friendly enough place, so long as you mind your business and stay out of trouble." Xavier studied Miguel with a perceptive gaze. "I always do, sir." His eyes flickered to Tsitsi again. "Though trouble has a way of finding a man sometimes, doesn't it?" Over the next few weeks, Xavier Zane became a regular customer at the Mijares general store. He would stop by on his infrequent trips to town, always polite, always purchasing only what he needed. Sometimes he would linger, engaging Miguel in conversation about the weather or local news. Occasionally, he would attempt to draw Tsitsi into their discussions, but she maintained a careful distance, responding with brief politeness. Despite her reservations about his employer, Tsitsi couldn't deny a growing curiosity about the quiet cowboy. Unlike other ranch hands who visited Willow Creek, Xavier never spent his wages at the saloon or engaged in the rowdy behavior typical of men far from home. Instead, he often carried a book in his saddlebag, and once she spotted him sitting under the shade of a cottonwood tree by the creek, lost in its pages. One afternoon in early June, Tsitsi was tending to her mother's garden behind the store when she heard the familiar sound of boots on gravel. She looked up to find Xavier approaching, leading his dappled gray horse. "Miss Mijares," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." Tsitsi stood, brushing dirt from her apron. "My father is inside if you need supplies." "Actually," Xavier said, shifting his weight slightly, "I was hoping to speak with you if you can spare a moment." Curiosity overrode caution. "What about, Mr. Zane?" Xavier glanced around before lowering his voice. "It's about your people, the Navajo men, who've gone missing." Tsitsi's heart quickened. "What do you know about that?" "I've seen things at the Double R that don't sit right with me," he replied, his blue eyes serious. "3 men being held in an old line shack near the north boundary. They're claiming they're rustlers, but you don't believe it," Tsitsi finished for him. Xavier shook his head. "No, madam, I don't. They're just boys, really. No older than 18 or 19. And they've been mistreated." Tsitsi's hands clenched at her sides. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I aim to help them, but I need someone they'll trust. Someone who speaks their language." His gaze was steady. "I thought perhaps you might. You're asking me to risk everything, my father's business, our place in this town, to help you free men being held by your employer?" Tsitsi challenged, even as hope flickered in her chest. "I'm asking you to help me do what's right," Xavier replied simply. "I don't hold with injustice, no matter who's committing it. I can get them out, but then what? They'll need someone to guide them back to their people safely." Tsitsi studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Why would a cowboy from Texas care about the fate of 3 Navajo men? A shadow passed over Xavier's face. "I've seen what happens when people with power decide others are worth less than themselves. During the war." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Let's just say I've made promises about the kind of man I want to be." Something in his expression, a mixture of determination and pain, convinced Tsitsi he was sincere. "When?" "Tomorrow night. Redding and most of the hands will be in town for a big poker game at the saloon." Xavier detailed his plan in a low voice. "I can bring them to the old missionary ruins east of town. If you could meet us there." "I'll bring food, medicine, and whatever else they need," Tsitsi agreed, her mind already racing with preparations. "And I know the safe paths back to the reservation." Relief washed over Xavier's features. "Thank you, Miss Mijares." As he turned to leave, Tsitsi called after him. "Why risk your job, maybe even your life, for this, Mr. Zane?" Xavier paused, looking back at her with those summer sky eyes. "Some things are worth the risk." The way he said it, holding her gaze, made Tsitsi wonder if he was speaking of more than just the rescue mission. That night, Tsitsi carefully explained the situation to her father. Miguel was initially alarmed, but ultimately supportive. "Your mother would be proud," he said, embracing her. "But you must be careful, Hija. There are those in town who already see us as outsiders. If they discover your involvement—" "I know, Papa," Tsitsi assured him, "but I cannot turn away from this." The following evening, after closing the store, Tsitsi gathered supplies into saddlebags and quietly led her horse from the small stable behind their modest home. The crescent moon provided just enough light to navigate the familiar trail leading east out of town. The missionary ruins were eerily silent when she arrived, the crumbling adobe walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. Tsitsi dismounted, listening intently for any sound. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, plagued by doubts. Had Xavier betrayed her? Was this an elaborate trap? Just as she was considering leaving, she heard the soft approach of horses. Tensing, she retreated into the shadows of a fallen wall, her hand moving to the knife sheathed at her waist, another piece of her mother's heritage she carried always. "Miss Mijares?" Xavier's hushed voice called out. "It's me." Tsitsi emerged from her hiding place to see Xavier leading 4 horses. 3 young Navajo men sat hunched on 3 of the mounts, their faces showing evidence of rough treatment. "You made it," she breathed, relief flooding through her. Xavier nodded grimly. "Barely. Someone came to the line shack unexpectedly. We had to wait him out." Tsitsi approached the young men, speaking in Navajo. "I am Tsitsi, daughter of Nijoni. I have come to help you return to our people." The oldest of the 3, a youth with a swollen eye and split lip, responded warily. "Why should we trust you? Or this white man?" "Because we are risking everything to help you," she replied honestly. "And because you have no other choice if you wish to see your families again." After a tense moment, the young man nodded. Tsitsi quickly assessed their injuries, applying salves from her saddlebag and distributing food and water. Xavier kept watch, his posture tense as he scanned the horizon. "We need to move," he finally said. "Dawn will be here before we know it, and they'll discover they're missing." Tsitsi finished bandaging a deep cut on the youngest boy's arm. "We'll take the Eastern Canyon Trail. It's longer but safer from pursuit." The group traveled through the night, Tsitsi leading them through narrow canyons and over rocky terrain that would leave minimal tracks. Xavier brought up the rear, vigilant for any sign of pursuers. They spoke little, the gravity of their situation keeping conversation to a minimum. As the first light of dawn streaked the sky, they reached a hidden spring where Tsitsi suggested they rest briefly. While the young Navajo men drank and washed their faces, Xavier approached Tsitsi. "You're good at this," he observed quietly, "finding paths where there seemed to be none." Tsitsi shrugged. "My mother taught me. She said knowledge of the land was the most valuable inheritance she could give me." She was right. Xavier's gaze was warm as it rested on her face. "You navigate 2 worlds with more grace than anyone I've ever met." The compliment caught Tsitsi off guard. "It's not always easy," she admitted. "In town, I'm too Navajo. On the reservation, I'm too white. Sometimes I feel I don't fully belong anywhere." Xavier's expression softened. "Perhaps belonging isn't about where you come from, but where your heart finds its home." Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Xavier's hand immediately went to his gun. "They've found our trails sooner than I expected." Tsitsi made a quick decision. "There's a place nearby, a hidden canyon my mother showed me. The entrance is almost invisible unless you know what to look for." She turned to the 3 young men, explaining rapidly in Navajo. They nodded their understanding. "You should go with them," Xavier said, checking his ammunition. "I'll lead the pursuers in another direction." "That's too dangerous," Tsitsi protested. "They'll kill you if they catch you." Xavier met her gaze steadily. "Then I'd better not get caught." Before she could argue further, he mounted his horse. "Get them to safety, Tsitsi. That's what matters now." The use of her first name, spoken with such quiet intensity, silenced her objections. "Be careful, Xavier." He tipped his hat with a half-smile that didn't reach his worried eyes. "I'll find you when it's safe. I promise." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped westward, deliberately leaving clear tracks for their pursuers to follow. Tsitsi watched him go, an unfamiliar ache in her chest, before turning to lead the 3 young men to the hidden canyon. The entrance was just as she remembered, a narrow fissure in the rock face, almost invisible unless you knew to look for the distinctive juniper tree growing at an angle nearby. Inside, the canyon opened up to reveal a secluded haven with a small spring and enough vegetation to sustain them for several days if necessary. Tsitsi settled the exhausted young men in a sheltered alcove, then took up a position near the entrance where she could watch for any sign of Xavier or their pursuers. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The young men slept fitfully while Tsitsi maintained her vigil, straining to hear any sound beyond the natural noises of the desert. By midday, concern had blossomed into full-blown worry. What if Xavier had been captured? What if he was lying wounded somewhere, or worse? Just as she was debating whether to venture out to search for him, a shadow fell across the narrow entrance. Tsitsi drew her knife, positioning herself protectively in front of the sleeping young men. "It's me," Xavier's voice called softly. He squeezed through the opening, his clothes torn and dusty, a bloody scratch across his cheek, but otherwise unharmed. Tsitsi couldn't stop herself from rushing forward. "You're alive." Xavier caught her hands in his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "I led them on a wild chase through the Badlands. Lost them in a box canyon about 10 miles south. They'll be searching that area for hours before they think to double back." "You're hurt," Tsitsi said, reaching up to examine the scratch on his cheek. "It's nothing," he assured her, but he didn't pull away from her touch. For a moment, they stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. The sound of one of the young men stirring broke the spell. Tsitsi stepped back, suddenly aware of how improper their proximity might appear. "You should rest while you can. We'll need to move again before nightfall." Xavier nodded, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer before he moved to sit against the canyon wall, tipping his hat forward to shade his eyes. As dusk approached, the group prepared to continue their journey. The youngest of the Navajo men, Bitsoy, had developed a fever from his infected arm wound. Tsitsi used the last of her medicinal herbs to prepare a poultice, but knew he needed proper care soon. "We're still a day's ride from the reservation," she told Xavier worriedly. "I'm not sure he'll make it without more medicine." Xavier considered their options. "There's an old trapper I know lives about 3 hours east of here. He's a bit of a hermit, but he knows his herbs and keeps to himself. Might be our best chance." With no better alternative, they set out as darkness fell, Xavier leading the way while Tsitsi supported the feverish Bitsoy on his horse. The terrain grew more rugged as they traveled east, forcing them to proceed carefully in the dim moonlight. True to Xavier's word, after about 3 hours they spotted a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its stone chimney. Xavier approached first, calling out a greeting before they got too close. The door creaked open to reveal an elderly man with a long white beard and piercing eyes. "That you, Zane? What kind of trouble you brought to my doorstep this time?" "The kind that needs your help, Otto," Xavier replied. "Got a boy here with a bad infection." Otto squinted past Xavier at the rest of their party, his gaze lingering on Tsitsi. Half Navajo girl and 3 full-blooded young men. "Redding's missing rustlers, I reckon?" "You hear things even out here," Xavier remarked. "Hear more than most," Otto agreed. He stepped aside. "Well, bring the boy in. Rest of you can water your horses at the stream out back. Don't suppose you're being followed?" "Not immediately," Xavier assured him. "But we can't stay long." Otto proved to be a skilled healer, cleaning Bitsoy's wound thoroughly and applying a strong-smelling salve before brewing a tea of willow bark and other herbs for the fever. While the old man worked, Tsitsi assisted, impressed by his knowledge of both white and native healing practices. "Your mother taught you well," Otto commented as they finished bandaging Bitsoy's arm. "I knew Najoni, you know. Strong woman. Good heart." Tsitsi looked up in surprise. "You knew my mother?" Otto nodded. "Years ago. She came to me when the white doctors in town wouldn't help your father when he took sick with the mountain fever. I taught her some of my remedies. She taught me some of hers. He glanced toward the door, where Xavier stood keeping watch. That one's got a good heart too. Different from most cowboys passing through. Before Tsitsi could respond, Xavier turned from his post. Riders coming. Still a ways off, but heading this direction. Otto moved with surprising agility for his age, gathering supplies. Back door leads to a path up the hillside. There's a cave about halfway up, not obvious unless you're looking for it. Go there and stay quiet. They worked quickly to move the still weak Bitsoy and the other young men up the hidden path. From the cave entrance, they could see a group of 6 riders approaching Otto's cabin. Even from a distance, Tsitsi recognized Ronald Redding's imposing figure at the lead. What if they heard him? She whispered to Xavier as they watched the men dismount and pound on Otto's door. Otto can take care of himself, Xavier assured her, though his hand rested on his holstered pistol. He survived out here alone for 30 years. Knows how to handle men like Redding. They watched as Otto emerged from his cabin, shotgun in hand, engaging in what appeared to be a heated conversation with the rancher. After several tense minutes, Redding and his men remounted and continued eastward, away from the hidden cave. He sent them in the wrong direction, Tsitsi realized with relief. Otto's nobody's friend, but he hates bullies more than he hates company, Xavier explained with a slight smile. We should wait until they're well out of sight before we move on. As they settled into wait, Xavier sat beside Tsitsi at the cave entrance. For a while, they watched in silence as the riders disappeared into the distance. Why did you really help them? Tsitsi finally asked. The truth this time. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. My mother was Cherokee, he said eventually. My father was a white settler who fell in love with her despite the disapproval of both their families. They carved out a life together in Tennessee, had me and my sister. His voice grew strained. During the war, while I was away fighting, some men decided the land would be better in white hands. My family was. They didn't survive. Tsitsi's hand found his in the darkness. I'm sorry. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers. I couldn't save them. But when I saw those boys at the ranch, being beaten for crossing some invisible line on land that was once theirs. He shook his head. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not again. You're a good man, Xavier Zane, Tsitsi said softly. He turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the moonlight filtering into the cave. And you, Tsitsi Mijares, are the bravest woman I've ever known. There in the quiet darkness, with danger still lurking outside, something shifted between them. Xavier's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a moment, Tsitsi thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light. When this is over, he said quietly, I'd like to call on you properly. If your father would allow it. Tsitsi knew she should refuse. Their worlds were too different, the obstacles too great. And yet, looking into his earnest blue eyes, she couldn't bring herself to deny the connection that had formed between them. I would like that, she admitted. A smile broke across Xavier's face, transforming his solemn features. Before he could respond, however, one of the young Navajo men called out softly from deeper in the cave, announcing that Bitsoy's fever had broken. The moment passed as they returned to the pressing matter of their journey. By midnight, they deemed it safe enough to continue, thanking Otto for his help before setting out toward the reservation boundary. They traveled through the night, making good time across the moonlit desert. As dawn approached, Tsitsi recognized landmarks that indicated they were nearing Navajo territory. Relief washed over her. They had almost made it. Then disaster struck. As they crossed a dry wash, Bitsoy's horse stumbled, sending the weakened young man tumbling to the ground. The noise echoed in the pre-dawn stillness, and moments later, they heard the unmistakable sound of approaching riders. They must have doubled back, Xavier said grimly, helping Bitsoy back onto his horse. Ride on with the boys, he told Tsitsi. The reservation boundary is less than 2 miles ahead. I'll hold them off. No, Tsitsi protested. They outnumber you. They'll kill you. They have to catch me first, Xavier replied with forced confidence. I know these lands now almost as well as you do. He gripped her shoulder. Get them to safety, Tsitsi. That was our mission. Torn between duty and her growing feelings for Xavier, Tsitsi made the painful choice. She instructed the 3 young men to follow her, casting one last desperate look at Xavier. I will find you, he promised, echoing his words from earlier. No matter what happens, I will find you. With that, he turned his horse and galloped toward a rocky ridge, drawing the pursuers away from their path to safety. Tsitsi led the young men onward, her heart heavy with worry for Xavier. They crossed onto reservation land just as the sun crested the horizon, where they were met by a group of Navajo men who had been searching for the missing youths. Among them was Bitsoy's father, a respected elder named Hatathli. After explanations were made and the young men reunited with their families, Hatathli approached Tsitsi. You have honored your mother's people with your courage, he said in Navajo. But I see worry in your eyes. The white man who helped you, he is in danger. Yes, Tsitsi admitted. He drew the pursuers away so we could reach safety. Hatathli considered this, then gestured to several young warriors. We will send riders to help him. A man who risks himself for our children deserves our protection. Tsitsi watched anxiously as the warriors rode out, praying they would find Xavier in time. Hours passed with no word, and by midday, she had begun to fear the worst. Her father would be worried about her extended absence, but she couldn't bring herself to leave without knowing Xavier's fate. Just as the afternoon heat reached its peak, a shout went up from the lookout. Riders were approaching the Navajo warriors, and with them a lone figure on a dappled gray horse. Tsitsi ran to meet them, her heart pounding. Xavier dismounted slowly, favoring his left side where a bloodstain darkened his shirt, but he was alive. Before she could stop herself, Tsitsi threw her arms around him. You're hurt, she said, pulling back to examine his wound. Just a graze, Xavier assured her, though his face was pale beneath his tan. Your friends arrived just in time. Redding and his men weren't expecting to face Navajo warriors on their own land. They retreated pretty quickly. Hatathli approached them. You have earned the gratitude of our people, Xavier Zane. Few white men would risk themselves for Navajo lives. It was the right thing to do, Xavier replied simply. He swayed slightly, and Tsitsi quickly moved to support him. He needs rest and his wound treated, she told Hatathli, who nodded and directed them to a nearby hogan where Xavier could be tended to. As Tsitsi cleaned and bandaged Xavier's wound, a bullet grazed across his ribs that looked worse than it was. She found herself thinking about the future. Their successful rescue would have consequences. Xavier could never return to the Double R Ranch, and there would be questions about her involvement as well. What will you do now? She asked as she tied off the bandage. Xavier caught her hand, his expression serious. I've been thinking about that. I have some savings enough to buy a small spread, maybe. There's good land north of here, near the Colorado border. You would stay in the territory? Tsitsi asked, hope rising in her chest. I would, Xavier confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. If I had a reason to. The implication hung in the air between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Xavier, Tsitsi began hesitantly. Even if you stayed, there would be difficulties. A man like you, and a woman like me. A man like me? Xavier questioned with a raised eyebrow. A cowboy. A white man, or mostly white, she amended. People would talk. They might make trouble for us both. Xavier sat up, wincing slightly at the movement. Tsitsi, I've spent too much of my life worrying about what others think. My parents taught me that love doesn't recognize the boundaries others try to impose on it. He took her hand in his. I know we haven't known each other long, But these past days have shown me the kind of woman you are: brave, compassionate, true to both sides of your heritage. And you are a man of honor, Tsitsi replied softly. But your heart has no boundaries mine can't cross, Xavier interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Unless you don't feel the same. The sincerity in his eyes melted Tsitsi's reservations. I do feel the same, she admitted. But it won't be easy. Xavier smiled, reaching up to cup her cheek. The things most worth having rarely are. Their return to Willow Creek 3 days later caused quite a stir. Xavier's wound had healed enough for travel, and they rode in together, accompanied by Hatafly and several other Navajo elders who wished to speak with the town sheriff about the false accusations against their young men. Miguel Mijares emerged from his store as they approached, relief washing over his face at the sight of his daughter. Tsitsi quickly dismounted and embraced him, explaining in hushed tones all that had transpired. As the Navajo elders proceeded to the sheriff's office, Xavier approached Miguel, hat in hand. Mr. Mijares, I'd like your permission to call on your daughter. Miguel looked between Xavier and Tsitsi, noting the way they stood close together, the tender glances they exchanged. You understand what you're asking? The challenges you would face. Yes, sir, Xavier replied without hesitation. I understand completely. Miguel studied the young cowboy for a long moment before his expression softened. My Najoni would have liked you, I think. She always said the bravest hearts are those willing to love across boundaries. The meeting at the sheriff's office was tense but productive. With the testimony of Xavier, a white cowboy with an honorable service record, and the dignified presence of the Navajo elders, Sheriff Dawson was forced to acknowledge that Ronald Redding had acted unlawfully. While Redding himself faced no serious consequences, such was the reality of the frontier justice system. The charges against the Navajo youths were dropped, and tensions between the town and the reservation eased somewhat. Xavier, no longer welcome at the Double R, took a temporary position working for Miguel while he searched for land to purchase. His presence in the Mijares household raised eyebrows in town, but the couple found they cared less about the whispers than they had expected. 4 months after their dangerous journey, on a crisp October evening, Xavier and Tsitsi were married in a ceremony that honored both their traditions. They stood before a Navajo medicine man and a Catholic priest, surrounded by Tsitsi's father, the young men they had rescued, and a small group of townspeople who had come to accept, if not fully understand, their union. As the newly married couple rode out to the small ranch Xavier had purchased near the border between town and reservation lands, Tsitsi looked at her husband with wonder. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Giving up the life you knew for this? Xavier's arm tightened around her waist as they rode double on his dappled gray. Not for a single moment, he assured her. My heart found its home the day I walked into your father's store and saw you arranging wildflowers. Tsitsi leaned back against his chest, content. And mine found its home the day you proved that courage isn't about how well you fight, but what you're willing to fight for. We'll build something special here, Xavier promised as their new home came into view. A place that belongs to both worlds just like us. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Tsitsi knew he was right. They had crossed boundaries of culture and custom to find each other, and in doing so, had created something new, a love that honored both their pasts while forging a shared future on the wild frontier.